I always dreamed of my father walking me down the aisle, not for the photos or the tradition, but because it meant he still saw me, still chose me. But on my wedding day, he chose my sister instead, a woman who's spent her whole life trying to erase mine. I used to wonder if I was the problem, if maybe I wasn't enough. But then something happened. Someone stepped forward, and in that moment, I realised family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shows up when your heart is breaking. Let me tell you how I learned that the hard way. I used to believe our house on Maple Street was magic. It had a white fence that creaked in the wind, a front porch with rocking chairs that always seemed to catch the golden hour just right, and a chimney that puffed gentle smoke on cold autumn mornings. To the neighbours, it was just another modest home in New Hampshire. But to me, it was the place where love lived. My earliest memories are coloured by warmth. Mom, Helen, smelled like vanilla and fresh bread. She hummed while baking, and her hands were always warm, even in winter. My father, Martin, was tall and steady, with a voice that could quiet storms. He made me feel like I was the most important person in the universe. Every Sunday, he'd take me on long walks through the woods behind our house, pointing out birds or letting me climb onto his shoulders to reach the lowest hanging apples. And every night, he'd kiss my forehead and say, "You are my brightest light, Natalie." But there was always a third presence in the house. My older sister, Sabrina. She was the bold one, tall, athletic, quick to speak, and quicker to win any argument. People described her as driven. I knew her as competitive. Where I found joy in painting sunsets or losing myself in books, Sabrina thrived on attention and praise. She always wanted more of everything, especially from our parents. Back then, I thought the rivalry was one-sided. I didn't compete, I adored her. Even when she teased me or rolled her eyes at my drawings, I still slipped notes under her bedroom door, asking if she wanted to paint with me. She never did. Everything began to change when Mum got sick. At first it was just fatigue, then tests, then hospital visits, and then words I barely understood at 12. Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. The house that once echoed with laughter became quiet. Days were measured in pill bottles and soft-spoken nurses. Sabrina, 15 at the time, grew more serious, more involved. She started managing the house, while Dad buried himself in work to avoid the looming heartbreak. I tried to help in my own way, folding laundry, baking cookies the way Mum had taught me. But I was still the child in the room. Decisions were made around me, not with me. Sabrina began to speak for all of us. "Natalie's too young to understand," she'd say. And for a while, maybe I was. But I remember one night, not long before Mum passed, when I heard voices from the kitchen while I was supposed to be asleep. I had come downstairs to get a glass of water, but froze when I heard my name. "She doesn't even ask how Mum is doing," Sabrina said, her voice low but sharp. "All she cares about is her little drawings. She's so disconnected, so selfish." There was silence. Then my father's sigh. "I've noticed that too." The glass in my hand felt like ice. I turned and tiptoed back upstairs, trying not to breathe. That night I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, the words echoing over and over. "Selfish, disconnected, I've noticed that too." I had brought my mother warm soup that morning. I had read her poetry at her bedside. I thought I was helping. That conversation marked a shift, subtle at first. My father stopped asking about my day. He came home later. When he did speak to me, it was polite, not warm, like I had become a guest in my own home. After Mum died, it only got worse. Sabrina filled the space Mum left behind with determination and control. She coordinated the funeral, handled the condolences, arranged who sat where. And me? I stood quietly in the back, holding my mother's favourite scarf and wondering when the house stopped feeling like home. I was 13 and already starting to disappear. After the funeral, the world didn't feel real. The house was filled with casseroles and awkward hugs. People said things like, "She's in a better place," and "Time heals all wounds." But no one told me what to do with the hollow silence left behind. And in that vacuum, Sabrina stepped in like a general after a war. She rearranged the house. Mum's perfume bottles were boxed up, her garden gloves tossed. She rewrote holiday plans and created new rules about chores and schedules. Dad didn't object. He seemed relieved that someone else had taken the reins. His grief turned him into a shell of the man I once knew, quiet, withdrawn, and increasingly unreachable. I tried at first to reclaim the normalcy. I baked Mum's favourite muffins on Saturday mornings like we used to, thinking maybe it would bring something familiar back. Sabrina didn't even look up from her laptop. Dad took one bite and said they were a little dry before heading back to his office. Little things like that chipped away at me. But the bigger cracks came later. Sabrina began telling Dad things I hadn't said. Natalie doesn't want to go to church anymore, she mentioned one day at breakfast. I blinked. I had never said that. In fact, I had been planning to ask Dad if he wanted to sit next to me like we used to. She's been spending too much money on art supplies, Sabrina added another time, while I stood right there. I opened my mouth to correct her, but Dad just sighed and nodded, like he'd expected it, like he already believed the worst. I became a background character in my own story. Every effort I made to reconnect, to talk, to help, was twisted by Sabrina into something selfish or immature. Slowly, painfully, Dad began to believe her version of me. Then one rainy afternoon, while cleaning out the attic, I stumbled upon something unexpected. I had been looking for a box of old sketch pads I thought Mum saved. Instead, buried under a blanket in a wooden chest, I found one of her journals. It was wrapped in a faded blue ribbon, worn from years of use. My hands trembled as I opened it. The pages were filled with her looping handwriting, familiar and comforting. She wrote about everything, recipes she wanted to try, her fears about the cancer, her love for Dad. And then on a page, dated about 6 months before her diagnosis, something stopped me cold. Sabrina worries me, she wrote. She's so strong, but sometimes I fear her strength comes from needing to control everything. I see the way she watches Natalie. There's a tightness in her eyes. I wonder if it's jealousy. I want them to be close, but I'm not sure Sabrina knows how. I read that page over and over, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest like lead. Mum had seen it too. She had noticed the same quiet undercurrents I had never been able to explain. And now, even in her absence, she had given me something I didn't know I needed, validation. I could have shown Dad. I could have said, look, Mom saw it too. But something inside me stopped. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was that last thread of hope that he might see me on his own without needing proof. So I slipped the journal into my backpack and brought it to my room. I hid it under the floorboard beneath my bed, the same place I used to hide my drawings as a kid. Now, instead of art, I hid evidence of the truth. From that day forward, the warmth of the house dimmed. The once magical walls now whispered warnings. The swing on the porch creaked like it mourned. The smell of baked bread never returned. And the girl who used to believe in magic began to prepare her escape. I thought if I worked hard enough, maybe I could earn him back. So I buried myself in school, straight A's, art competitions, volunteer work. I painted murals, won district awards, even had one of my pieces displayed at the town hall. Every accomplishment was another pebble I stacked, hoping it would become a bridge back to my father. But every time I tried to cross it, Sabrina was there to burn it down. And when I invited Dad to my school's winter art show, where my watercolour titled The Last Light had won first place, he never showed. I waited by the door in my best dress, clutching the programme, scanning each arriving parent for his familiar grey coat. I watched as my classmates posed with their families, smiling proudly in front of their work. An hour later I gave up. That night I came home to find him laughing at the dinner table with Sabrina. They were sharing takeout from his favourite Thai restaurant. My chair was empty. I asked, "Did you get my note about the art show?" He blinked. "I thought you said it wasn't a big deal. Sabrina mentioned you didn't really like being in the spotlight." My jaw tightened. "I never said that." Sabrina smiled faintly, sipping her soda. I must have misunderstood. It was like being erased in real time, like my memories were being rewritten by someone else's pen. Still, I kept trying. Another show came in spring, and this time for a statewide youth competition. My oil painting, Tethered Sky, took second place. The ceremony was downtown, a big event with photographers and press. I reminded Dad 2 weeks in advance, then 1 week, then the day before. He texted an hour before it started. "Can't make it. Last minute client dinner. Proud of you." I stood in the auditorium, trophy in hand, smiling for a camera with no one behind it. Later, I learned that there was no client dinner. He and Sabrina had gone to a wine tasting event for her networking. There were photos online. But the final crack came in junior year. I had just finished performing a solo at the Spring Music Showcase, my first time playing guitar in public. The performance hall was full. I scanned the seats through stage lights, hoping, expecting nothing. Afterward, I waited outside with my friends. Their parents hugged them, handed them flowers, took pictures. I stood alone, arms crossed against the wind. Then I saw them. Across the street, at a small Italian restaurant with big windows, Dad and Sabrina were sitting at a corner booth, laughing, sharing tiramisu. He raised his glass to toast. I froze. I stared at them through the window as tears blurred the world around me. I waited for him to glance outside, to notice me, but he never did. He never even turned his head. That night, I packed a small bag and sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't cry, not really. I just felt blank. Something inside me had finally gone quiet, like a light turned off. 2 days later, I submitted early applications to colleges on the other side of the state. When my guidance counsellor asked why I wasn't applying closer to home, I said, because I need to leave it. And when the acceptance letter from Hanover University arrived in the mail, I didn't wait for congratulations. I celebrated alone, in the silence I'd learned to call home. College was supposed to be a fresh start, but at first it just felt like a new version of loneliness, the kind with crowded dining halls and shared dorm walls, but no one who truly saw you. I kept to myself. I didn't join clubs. I avoided calls from home, though to be fair, there weren't many. My dad would send short, polite texts every few weeks. Sabrina never reached out. I told people my family was busy or far away, which was easier than explaining the truth. Then came Ethan. It started with a lost pen. I was sketching under a tree outside the engineering building, lost in a study break, when a guy in a grey hoodie asked, "Do you have a spare?" I looked up, expecting some distracted frat guy, but his smile was quiet, his voice gentle. "I left my whole backpack in the lab," he added sheepishly. I handed him a pen and nodded. He sat nearby, not too close, and we started talking. It turned out he was an engineering major, just a year ahead of me. We talked about nothing at first. Bad cafeteria food, the awkward architecture of our dorms, the squirrels on campus that acted like they owned the place. But something about him made me feel calm, seen. We began studying together in the library. Coffee turned into late-night walks. By mid-semester, he was my person. No drama, no games, just a steady presence in a world that had always felt shaky. When he invited me to meet his family for Thanksgiving, I hesitated. The idea of family made my chest tighten. But he insisted. "They'll love you," he said. I didn't believe him until I met them. Martha, his mother, greeted me with a hug so warm I almost cried. His father Henry told dry jokes that somehow still made me laugh. And then there was Uncle Frank. Ethan's great uncle, technically, but you'd never know it by how close they were. Frank was in his 60s, wore mismatched socks on purpose, and quoted poetry while slicing the turkey. He asked me questions, real ones, about my art, my favourite authors, the things that made me feel alive. Over dessert, he pulled me aside and said, "You've got a quiet kind of fire in you. I hope you let it burn." I hadn't realised until then how long it had been since anyone spoke to me like I mattered. Later that night, while helping Frank dry dishes, I asked how he'd gotten into literature. He smiled, nostalgic. I was supposed to go into accounting, family business, but I chose teaching instead. My father didn't speak to me for 10 years after that, said I was wasting my life reading poems. I paused. "That must have been hard," he shrugged. "It was, but I figured if I had to choose between approval and joy, I'd choose joy, every time." His eyes softened. "You know what I see when I look at you, Natalie? Someone who's trying to be small to keep others comfortable. Don't. Be loud in your love. Take up space. Be exactly who you are." That was the night something cracked open in me. Not painfully, but like sunlight breaking through cloud. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was tiptoeing through life. With Ethan and his family, I was allowed to exist fully and maybe to finally belong. The night Ethan proposed was quiet, simple and perfect, just like him. He had planned it with such subtlety that I didn't suspect a thing. It started with breakfast at the corner cafe, where we used to meet during finals week, ordering the same lopsided blueberry muffins and bad coffee we once swore we'd never eat again. Then we wandered the art museum downtown, retracing the steps of our first real date, where he had stood behind me for 20 minutes while I explained why Monet made me cry. Dinner came last, my favourite Italian place, tucked into a side street with candlelight and soft jazz humming in the background. The hostess led us to a corner booth already set with flowers I recognised from my mother's old garden. White tulips. My breath caught. "How did you—" He smiled. Uncle Frank remembered. As dessert arrived, a shared tiramisu, Ethan reached across the table and slid a small velvet box towards me. "Natalie," he began, his voice steady, but his fingers trembling slightly. "You've taken the broken parts of your past and built something beautiful. I've watched you heal and fight and love so fully. It leaves me breathless. I want to keep building a life with you, one where you're always seen, always chosen." He opened the box. Inside was a vintage ring, silver and sapphire, delicate and unique. "Will you marry me?" Tears blurred everything, the candles, the ring, even his hopeful eyes. I nodded, too choked to speak, and whispered, "Yes," before falling into his arms. That night, wrapped in each other's warmth, I let myself believe that I could have a future free of the shadows I'd been born into. A new beginning. The next morning, I called my father. It rang 3 times before he picked up. "Hi, Dad," I said, heart pounding. "Natalie, everything all right?" His voice was flat, clipped, like I was calling about a car repair. "Yeah, everything's good. I wanted to tell you, Ethan proposed last night." I said yes. A pause. Then, "Well, congratulations. He seems like a decent guy." That was it. No excitement. No questions. No, "I'm happy for you." Just cold formality, like I'd sent a quarterly report. "We're thinking next June," I added, trying to pull something, anything human from him. "All right, just let me know the date. I'll check my schedule." His schedule. I hung up shortly after, more numb than sad, but then came Sabrina's message, a text. "OMG, congrats, little sis, so happy for you. That ring is so you." The forced enthusiasm practically oozed through the screen. I barely had time to process it before I saw her new status update. "Excited for what's coming this summer. Big things ahead." No names, no details, just enough implication to sting. I stared at the screen, trying not to spiral. Ethan found me on the couch a few minutes later, phone in hand, face blank. "Was it your dad?" he asked. I nodded. "And Sabrina." He sat beside me, pulling me into his chest. "You don't have to explain." But I did, even if he already knew. 2 people who should have celebrated with me, and instead they both made it feel small. He kissed my hair. "Then we'll make it big, Natalie. We'll make it ours." And for the first time that day, I let myself believe him. Despite the cold reaction from my father and the performative enthusiasm from Sabrina, I kept trying. Part of me clung to the idea that a wedding might bridge the distance, that maybe, just maybe, this milestone would pull us back into orbit. So I texted Dad a few days later, inviting him to join Ethan and me for a tour of the venue we were considering. It was a historic inn with ivy-covered stone walls and a small garden where the ceremony would be held. I imagined walking beside him through the rows of chairs, talking about flower arrangements, maybe even laughing together like we used to. His reply came an hour later. "Can't make it. Work meeting. Let me know what you decide." Work meeting. Like this was a client pitch, like I was an obligation penciled into a planner he never looked at. I didn't respond. Ethan didn't ask what the message said. He just reached over, took my hand and gave it a small squeeze. That small gesture grounded me in the present, in him, in the life we were building without conditions. Still, the ache lingered. I buried myself in wedding planning, drafting invitations, tasting cakes, comparing shades of blush and ivory. Martha, Ethan's mum, offered to help, and I found myself drawn to her more than I expected. She didn't push or pry. She simply showed up, gently offering opinions when I asked and support when I didn't. One Saturday afternoon, she invited me over for tea and wedding brainstorming. I arrived with my binder and colour swatches, ready to distract myself with linen textures and seating charts. Instead, she handed me a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I found this while cleaning the guest room closet," she said, her voice soft. "Uncle Frank tucked it away years ago. He said it wasn't his to keep, but it didn't feel right to throw it out." I slowly unwrapped it, unsure what to expect. And then I saw it. A framed charcoal sketch, faint but beautiful, of two girls in a garden. One tall and laughing, the other sitting cross-legged, focused on a flower in her hand. My breath hitched. "I know this," I whispered. "This hung in our living room growing up. My mother drew it." Martha nodded. "Frank said your house was sold quickly after everything. He stopped by one day when it was being cleared out and asked the movers if he could keep this." I ran my fingers over the glass, the image blurring through my tears. "She never signed her work," I said, voice trembling. "She always said art should speak louder than a name." The room fell quiet. It had been years since I'd seen that drawing, since I'd thought about how often I used to stare at it, tracing the charcoal lines with my eyes, memorising the gentle curve of the smaller girl's braid, the messy garden behind them that looked just like ours. That drawing was childhood. It was safety. It was Mom. And now it was here. In a stranger's home, protected, remembered. Tears spilled down my cheeks before I could stop them. Martha moved beside me without a word, wrapping me in a hug that felt maternal in a way I hadn't known in years. "I miss her," I admitted, the words crumbling from my mouth like dry leaves. "Even now, especially now." "You carry her with you," Martha said softly. "In every brushstroke, in every kind word you give, in the way you keep trying, even when it hurts." Later, when I thanked Uncle Frank, he shrugged like it was nothing. "Your mother had a gift," he said. "I just didn't want it to end up in a dumpster." I smiled through damp eyes. "You're the only person who thought to save anything." He looked at me, serious. "That's not true. You've been saving pieces of her all along. You just didn't know it." That night, I hung the drawing in our apartment, right above my desk, and every time I looked at it, I remembered that love doesn't disappear. It lingers in the people who choose to keep it alive. And sometimes it returns through the hands of people you never expected, but who somehow know exactly what you need. We chose June 10th for the wedding, plenty of time to plan, to save, and I hoped for my father to find space in his life for me again. The invitations went out 9 months in advance, each one carefully designed, and with soft floral prints and a hand-painted touch I added myself. I mailed my father's first, slipping a note inside. "I'd love for you to walk me down the aisle, if you're willing." 2 weeks later, he called. "I got the invitation," he said, voice measured. "It's nice." "Did you read the note?" A pause. "I did." My heart pounded. "What do you think?" Another pause, then quietly. "I'd be honoured, Natalie." It was the first time in years I felt something real in his voice. I let out a shaky breath, not realising how tightly I'd been holding it. For the first time, it seemed like things might be different. That maybe, just maybe, we were finding our way back. I started to picture it. Him waiting at the end of the aisle, his hand on mine, guiding me forward. Not just physically, but symbolically, like a blessing I'd long been denied. But peace in my world never lasted long. 3 months before the wedding, I got a text from Sabrina. "Hey, just wanted to give you a heads up. My firm's throwing a celebration for my sales milestone. June 10th. It's going to be big." I stared at the screen, rereading it like the date might somehow change. June 10th. My wedding day. At first I thought it was a mistake, but when I called to ask, Sabrina sounded all sweetness and innocence. "Oh no," she said, dragging out the syllables. "I must have totally forgotten that was your date. But it's a morning thing, starts at 11, should be done by 3, Dad can do both." My ceremony was at 4. The venue was nearly 2 hours away from the city where her event would be held. There was no way he could attend both. At least not without showing up late, frazzled, and missing everything that mattered. I asked calmly, "Did you really forget the date, Sabrina? I sent the invite months ago." "Well, I don't know, Natalie," she said, feigning irritation. "You know how things get lost. Besides, it's not a competition." But it was, and had always been. That night, I called my father. "Did you know Sabrina scheduled something on the same day as the wedding?" "Yes," he said. "Unfortunate timing, but her firm's recognising her achievements. It's a big deal." "So is my wedding," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Of course," he replied. "I'm planning to attend both." I hesitated. "How? The locations aren't even close." "I'll leave as early as I can," he said. "I'm sure I can make it to the ceremony in time." But I heard it. That hesitancy, that hedging, it was happening again. I was being measured against her and found lacking. "I need you there for photos, for the pre-ceremony, for support, not just to walk in halfway through." "I'll try," he said. "But let's not make this bigger than it is." Bigger than it is. My wedding day. And once again, I wasn't enough to come first. I hung up, my chest tight with a familiar ache. Later, when Ethan found me sitting alone on the edge of our bed, I didn't need to say anything. He just sat beside me and whispered, "You don't have to compete anymore." But the truth was, I didn't want to compete. I just wanted to matter. A week later, I sat at my laptop, half-heartedly updating our wedding checklist, when something tugged at me, an itch I couldn't ignore. I opened Sabrina's profile. Her posts about the upcoming celebration had become increasingly extravagant. Custom decorations, catering from a high-end restaurant, a special stage set up at a premier venue. But something didn't add up. I knew her company. Small, independent, focused on real estate, not the kind to throw lavish parties. On a hunch, I opened her firm's website. No mention of her name in the news section. No public announcements, no press releases. I called the venue she tagged. They had no booking under her name, or her company's. My stomach turned. It was a lie, all of it. She wasn't being honoured. She'd orchestrated an event out of thin air on my wedding day for one reason: to pull Dad away. I closed my laptop, hands shaking. It wasn't just sabotage, it was deliberate cruelty. And still, part of me hoped my father would see through it. But that hope shattered 2 weeks before the wedding, when my phone rang. It was Dad. I hesitated before answering. "Hey." "Hi, Natalie," he said. His voice was stiff, formal, already bracing for fallout. "I need to talk to you about the wedding." I closed my eyes. "Okay." "I've been thinking about the logistics," he began, "and I don't think I can make it to the ceremony on time." Silence. "I'll be at Sabrina's event. She needs me there. It's important to her." "She needs you more than I do." My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay calm. "She's under a lot of pressure. This is a milestone for her career. It's my wedding." "I know," he said, "but I can't be in 2 places at once." There was a long pause. "You said you'd walk me down the aisle," he sighed. "Maybe Ethan's father can do it. Or a friend. Someone close." Like I wasn't. I bit back the sob in my throat. "So you're choosing her?" "It's not about choosing, it's about circumstances." But we both knew it was exactly that. He offered to come to the reception, if things wrap up in time. I mumbled something and hung up. The phone slid from my hand as I curled into myself, tears finally spilling. Not just from hurt, but from the realisation I'd avoided for too long. I would never be his priority. Not over Sabrina. Not even close. I didn't get out of bed for hours. Ethan brought water, tissues, food I didn't touch. My friends called. I let it all go to voicemail. That night, he gently suggested we postpone. "We can reschedule," he said. "A different date, give him a chance to come." But I shook my head. "No, that's what she wants. That's what he's letting her do." I didn't want to start my marriage by bending to people who never showed up for me. So I didn't. The next morning, my phone rang again. This time, Uncle Frank. "Ethan told me," he said gently. "I'm so sorry, Natalie. I should have seen this coming," I replied. Hollow. He never chose me. There was a pause. Then Frank said something that stayed with me, a balm over a deep wound. "Not everyone who helps create a life knows how to nurture one, Being a father isn't about DNA, it's about presence and love, and showing up when it matters. I didn't answer right away. He continued, "You've always deserved someone to walk beside you, not because they have to, but because they want to." That was when I knew. I had lost something that could never be repaired. But maybe, just maybe, I had gained something too. The morning of the wedding arrived on a beam of golden sunlight. I had barely slept, but somehow I felt wide awake, like my heart had chosen clarity over rest. My bridesmaids fluttered around me in soft blush dresses, sipping coffee, laughing nervously. The air smelled faintly of hairspray and roses. But in the quiet moments, when no one was pinning a veil or adjusting a hem, I felt the hollow space where my father should have been. I tried not to focus on it. Today wasn't about absence, it was about presence. At noon, there was a knock at the suite door. When I opened it, Uncle Frank stood there, looking dapper in a tailored navy tuxedo that softened his usually whimsical appearance. His silver hair was neatly combed back, and in his hands he held a small, carefully wrapped box. "I thought I'd bring this by before the ceremony," he said, eyes crinkling with warmth. Inside the box was a delicate lace handkerchief, aged but pristine, embroidered with tiny blue flowers. "It belonged to my mother," he explained. "She carried it on her wedding day in 1931. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment to pass it on." I touched the fabric gently, the stitches fine and intricate. "It's beautiful." "I thought it could be your something old, and something blue," he added, voice low with emotion. Tears gathered in my eyes before I could stop them. "Thank you, Frank, for this, for everything." He simply smiled and gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "See you at the end of the aisle." As he left, Martha entered, carrying another small box, this one a velvet pouch. "I wanted to give you this earlier," she said, "but I figured today was the perfect time." Inside was a silver bracelet, dainty and simple, with a single charm, a paintbrush crossed with a pen. "I remembered you saying once that you loved both painting and writing when you were a girl," she said. "So I had it made." I turned the charm in my palm, speechless. "That's your voice, Natalie," she continued, "creative, bold, and completely your own." I hugged her, feeling the weight of everything I had lost and everything I had found crash into me at once. The bridal suite emptied slowly as the ceremony neared. I stood before the mirror, dress shimmering with subtle beading, veil pinned delicately in my hair. My makeup artist had joked that I looked timeless, but the truth was I looked exactly like the girl I had fought so hard to protect. Not just a bride, but the woman I had become. At 3:45, the coordinator knocked. "They're ready for you." I walked slowly towards the lobby, my bouquet trembling slightly in my grip. Uncle Frank waited there, hands folded in front of him. When he saw me, his eyes welled instantly. "You look like your mother," he whispered. I blinked hard. "You really think so?" "I know so." He offered his arm and I took it. As the music swelled, the doors opened and we stepped into the garden. Gasps and smiles rippled through the seated guests, but I saw only one face, Ethan's. He stood at the altar, eyes locked on mine, a gentle smile curving his lips. I saw the glint of tears. He looked at me like I was the sun itself, warm, radiant, and blindingly alive. With each step, I felt something inside me releasing, not pain, but permission, to move forward, to be chosen, to let go. When we reached the end of the aisle, Frank leaned in and kissed my cheek. "You were never alone, Natalie," he whispered. Then he placed my hand in Ethan's, and for the first time in my life I felt fully seen. The reception was a blur of light and laughter. After the ceremony, guests spilled into the ballroom, a warm space strung with fairy lights and filled with the scent of peonies and champagne. The music hummed gently in the background, and for the first time in weeks I let myself feel joy without holding back. Ethan and I danced our first dance to a soft acoustic version of our favourite song. Martha cried. Frank toasted. Friends clinked glasses and snapped photos. My cheeks hurt from smiling. I almost believed the day would stay perfect, until Thomas walked in. He arrived an hour late, a bit breathless and visibly uneasy. My cousin, Mum's nephew, had always been kind but distant, walking the tightrope between Sabrina and me with careful balance. Tonight, though, he looked different, like someone carrying something heavy. He pulled me aside during the cake cutting. "Hey," he said awkwardly, tugging at his tie. "Sorry I'm late. I went to Sabrina's thing first." I blinked. "You did?" He nodded slowly. "I thought I could make both. It didn't go long." Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. "How was it?" He hesitated. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. Natalie, there was no event. Not really." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "It wasn't a company celebration. No formal speeches, no firm banner, nothing. It was just a casual get-together at her apartment. 15 people maybe, mostly gym friends and a couple co-workers. No one even mentioned her work." The room tilted slightly. "She lied?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Thomas nodded. "Yeah, she told everyone it was just a fun brunch for her birthday, which, by the way, is in August." I gripped the edge of a nearby chair. "She told Dad it was a company award, that it was important." "I know," he said, "and there's more." He pulled out his phone, scrolling before handing it to me. A text thread with Sabrina, weeks old Sabrina. "Don't worry about the wedding. He only invited you out of politeness. He told me that himself. Said she wouldn't care if he came or not." Below that, another message. "I told Dad it wasn't a big deal to her. He won't feel guilty missing it if he thinks she doesn't really want him there." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. "She manipulated him," I whispered. "Again." Thomas looked ashamed. "I should have said something sooner. I didn't realise how far she'd gone." I handed the phone back numb. "Thank you for telling me." He gave me a sad smile. "You deserve the truth." And just like that, the day shifted again. When the reception was nearly over, guests dancing lazily, candles burning low, my father arrived. He walked in like he didn't realise the weight he carried, like he hadn't missed the most important hour of my life. He wore the same suit from my high school graduation, held a small gift bag. I saw him before he saw me. He scanned the room, nodded at a few guests, and made his way towards me with a tentative smile. "There she is," he said. "Sorry I'm late. Sabrina's thing ran longer than expected." I didn't respond. He handed me the bag. "It's from both of us." Inside were 2 crystal wine glasses. Generic, pretty, empty. I set them aside. "Who walked you down the aisle?" he asked. "Frank." His brows twitched. "That old guy." "He's family," I said, simply. My father looked around again, like trying to understand what he'd missed. "I made it to the party at least," he offered. The party, not the vows, not the walk, not the moment. Just the afterthought. I didn't say it out loud, but I didn't have to. The space between us said it all. My father stood beside me, holding a glass of champagne he barely sipped, as if unsure what to do with himself. Around us, the reception continued, a swirl of soft jazz, melting candles, and last dances, but the warmth no longer reached this corner of the room. "I saw the photos on the table," he said finally. "You looked beautiful." "Thank you," I replied, my voice flat. "You would have seen it in person if you'd been there." He exhaled through his nose. "Sabrina's event ran long. She had people counting on her." "And I didn't?" I asked, turning to face him fully now. "Your daughter was getting married." "I'm here now," he said, trying for a smile. "That has to count for something." Before I could respond, he added, "So, Frank walked you down the aisle?" I nodded. "Yes." His jaw tightened. "I barely know the man." "You weren't there to do it," I said. "He was." His eyes flashed. "You replaced me with a stranger." I stepped back slightly, stunned. "I didn't replace you. You removed yourself. I asked you months ago. You said yes. Then you chose to prioritise a fake party over your own daughter's wedding." He blinked. "It wasn't fake." "It was," another voice cut in. Thomas had approached quietly, holding his phone in his hand. "Uncle Martin," he said calmly, "can we talk for a second?" My father looked between us, irritated. "What is it now?" Thomas handed him the phone. "Read this." Dad took the device, brows furrowing, as he scrolled through the messages. His lips moved slightly as he read Sabrina's words. "Don't worry, she won't care if you skip it. She only invited you to be polite. She said it herself. She doesn't expect you to come. He read them twice, then a third time, his face drained of colour. That's not possible, he said, voice hollow. She wouldn't. She did, Thomas said. She lied to you, just like she always has. Yeah, my father looked at me then, eyes wide with something like disbelief, but behind it shame bloomed like bruises. I didn't know, he whispered. I thought. You thought I didn't want you there, I finished, because that was easier than asking me, easier than being uncomfortable, easier than choosing me. He looked like he wanted to speak, but no words came. Just then, Frank approached from across the room, catching the edge of the conversation. His steps were steady, but his gaze sharp. Is everything all right? He asked, resting a hand gently on my shoulder. My father's eyes narrowed. So this is the man who took my place. Frank didn't flinch. No one can take the place of a father, but someone has to stand in when a father steps aside. I didn't step aside. Frank interrupted gently but firmly. You chose to miss her ceremony. You chose to believe lies instead of your own daughter. That wasn't because you couldn't be there, it was because you didn't want to be enough. Silence settled between them like a weight. I've been here, Frank continued, not because I had to be, but because I saw someone worth showing up for. My father's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at me again, but I couldn't read the expression in his eyes. Regret, anger, sadness, maybe all three. I need to talk to Sabrina, he muttered. You should, I said quietly. But don't expect her to tell you the truth this time either. He hesitated. Natalie, I shook my head. Not tonight. He nodded slowly, turned, and walked out the door without another word. I exhaled, long and slow, as if releasing the last breath I'd been holding since I was 12. Frank turned to me, his voice softer now. Are you all right? I looked up at him, the man who had stood where another should have been. I am now, I said, and I meant it. After Martin walked away, I stayed rooted to the floor for a long moment. The ballroom buzzed faintly behind me. Clinking glasses, laughter, music that no longer matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. From the corner of my eye, I saw him step outside, phone pressed to his ear. Through the glass doors, his body language shifted, rigid posture, free hand clenched. I didn't need to hear the words to know he was calling Sabrina. He paced, stopped, paced again, then his hand dropped. She'd hung up on him. He stood there for several seconds, phone dangling at his side, before pocketing it and glancing back through the door. Our eyes met, mine full of salt and fire, his unreadable. He stepped back from the window and disappeared down the corridor. Gone, again. I pressed my fingers to my lips, willing myself to stay upright, to stay calm. But something broke, quietly, internally, not like glass shattering, more like a thread snapping deep inside my chest. I turned to go back into the room when Ethan appeared. He didn't ask anything at first, just placed his hand on my lower back and guided me towards the small alcove near the coat room, away from the guests, away from the spotlight. Only once we were alone did he whisper, "Are you okay?" I stared at him, at the man who had chosen me without conditions, who had loved me through my silence, through my doubts, through every moment I thought I wasn't worthy. No, I admitted, I'm not okay. His brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't speak. But I'm strong enough, I continued, strong enough to not let him ruin this day, strong enough to know that love, real love, isn't something you beg for. It's something you receive willingly and give back freely. Ethan nodded, his arms wrapping around me. I melted into his chest, letting my breath sink with his heartbeat. I'm proud of you, he said. Before I could respond, another presence approached. Uncle Frank, always watching from a respectful distance, now stepped closer. You don't have to hold it together for us, he said gently. I'm not, I replied. I'm holding it together for me. He nodded approvingly. Then in his quiet, deliberate voice, he added, Blood doesn't make family. Presence does. And love. You don't need someone to share your name, to share your heart. I looked between them. This man who had shown up for every rehearsal, every fitting, every late-night phone call about centerpieces, and this husband who had stood beside me without asking for perfection. Thank you, I whispered. Frank smiled. Family is made by those who stay, who choose you, again and again. Later, when I re-entered the reception, it was different. Not because anything had changed, but because I had. I danced, I laughed, I toasted, I kissed Ethan in front of everyone, while people cheered and clinked glasses. I held Martha's hand and cried softly during her speech. I let Frank spin me around during the father-daughter dance while guests wiped away tears. And when it was time for the final send-off, I stood beneath a tunnel of sparklers, surrounded by faces filled with love. Not because they had to be there, but because they wanted to. I looked back one last time before stepping into the car with Ethan. And I didn't see Martin. I didn't see the empty chair. I didn't see absence. I saw fullness. Because for the first time in my life, I understood being chosen means everything, and I had finally chosen myself. Greece was everything we hoped it would be. Sun-soaked streets, whitewashed houses, and waves that crashed like applause against cliffs. Ethan and I wandered through ancient ruins by day, toasted our future over candle-lit dinners by night, and let the quiet between us say what words never could. We made it. For 2 weeks, we didn't mention the wedding drama. We didn't speak Sabrina's name. We didn't talk about my father. But he was there in the silence, in the empty dad contact on my phone, in the missed calls I refused to check, in the instinct to send him a photo of the Acropolis before remembering he wouldn't know what to say. When we returned home to Philadelphia, the first thing I noticed was the blinking light on our landline. Old-fashioned, I know, but it was Ethan's nod to nostalgia. 5 new voicemails, all from my father. I didn't play them right away. Instead, I opened my email. 2 unread messages from him. One with the subject line, "I'm sorry." Another, "Please read this." I did. It was longer than I expected, thoughtful, painful. He wrote about confronting Sabrina the night of the wedding, how she denied everything at first, then broke down when he showed her the messages Thomas had forwarded. How she confessed, tearfully but unrepentantly, that she had lied because he always loved Natalie more. She said it like it justified everything, he wrote, and maybe deep down I let her believe that. Maybe I even believed it myself. But I see now, I failed you both, in different ways. I let grief make me lazy. I let Sabrina become my filter for everything about you, because it was easier than feeling the guilt of not knowing my own daughter. He said she'd left town the next morning, gone to Miami. No goodbye, no forwarding address. She won't take my calls, maybe she's punishing me, or maybe she's just tired of the truth. He ended the email simply, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll let me try to earn it." I stared at the screen long after the message ended. Ethan came in quietly, dropping his bag on the kitchen counter. "Messages?" he asked, already knowing. I nodded. "Are you going to call him?" "I don't know." He didn't push. He never did. Instead, he poured me tea and sat beside me in the quiet. Later that week, Uncle Frank called, as he did every Sunday. "Still married?" he teased. "Barely," I said with a smile. "He steals the covers." "Divorce him immediately." His voice turned softer. "Did you hear from Martin?" "I did. And I read it. That's a start." He never offered advice unless asked, but today I needed his wisdom. "Do you think I should forgive him?" Frank paused. "I think forgiveness is a gift, but it's not free. It takes something from you, and only you can decide if what you get in return is worth it." I swallowed. "I don't want to carry this anger forever." "Then don't," he said. "But don't hand him absolution just because he finally showed up. Let him prove he means it. Let him earn his place." Ethan echoed that later that night when I finally broke the silence. "If you want to let him in," he said gently, "we'll figure it out together. But if you don't, that's okay too. You don't owe anyone your peace." Their words didn't answer everything, but they reminded me of something I'd forgotten. This door. It didn't have to be locked, but it didn't have to be wide open either. It could be a little ajar, just enough to see who still knocked. We met at a cafe halfway between his home in Allentown and ours in Philadelphia. Neutral ground, public, quiet, safe. I arrived 10 minutes early. He was already there. He stood when he saw me, awkward in his posture, holding a paper cup like a lifeline. His face was thinner, eyes heavier, than I remembered from the wedding night. He looked older, but then again so did I. "Hi, Natalie," he said, voice soft, almost unsure. I nodded. Hi. We sat. The first few minutes were filled with sips and silences, the kind that stretch and echo louder than words. I wanted him to speak first, to fill the space he had emptied for years. Finally, he did. I've gone over everything in my head, he said slowly. Every missed moment. Every time I chose the wrong version of the story. And I don't have excuses, just regret. I didn't respond. He continued. After your mum died, I shut down. Sabrina stepped up and I let her lead because it was easier than leading through pain. But I see now, I let her write the narrative, and I never once asked you what yours was. Tears pricked my eyes, but I held them. I believed her lies because they made me feel less guilty about being absent, he said. And by the time I realised what was happening, I think I was too ashamed to face what I'd lost. His eyes met mine then, wet and unguarded. I missed so much of your life, and I missed the one moment that mattered most. I know I don't deserve a second chance, Natalie, but I'm asking if I can try to earn one. The lump in my throat cracked. I used to wait for you, you know, I said quietly. Every recital, every ceremony, every time I brought home an award, I always looked for your face. I know, he whispered. I see that now, and I hate that I wasn't there. Tears finally spilled, sliding silently down my cheeks. He reached for a napkin and held it out, hand trembling. I took it. I don't know if I can forget everything, I said. You shouldn't, he replied, but I hope someday you'll forgive me anyway. We sat a long time after that. No more confessions. Just a father and daughter learning how to sit in the same silence without breaking it. Weeks later, Ethan and I hosted a small dinner for both sides of the family, a step towards healing, toward blending what once was with what now existed. Martin arrived with a bottle of wine and a bouquet of tulips. Frank answered the door. There was a moment, tense, wordless. Then Martin extended his hand. Thank you, he said, for walking her down the aisle, for being there when I wasn't. Frank hesitated, then shook it. She deserved someone who saw her. Martin nodded. She always did. The evening was simple, roast chicken laughter, stories exchanged between strangers becoming kin. Martin stayed quiet for the most part, but when he spoke it was with intention. No defensiveness, no deflection, just presence. He offered to help with dishes. Frank accepted. I watched them from the kitchen, two men who could have been rivals, now bonded by the same truth. They both loved me, in different ways, but real nonetheless. Then came Thanksgiving. Ethan and I hosted again, our first as a married couple. Our table was full, Martha, Henry, Frank, Martin, Thomas, a few friends from college. There were mismatched chairs, spilled gravy and second servings of pie. Laughter ricocheted around the room. Sabrina wasn't there. She declined the invitation with a single-word text, travelling. No one asked further. After dinner, as candles flickered low and bellies filled with warmth, Ethan raised his glass. To chosen family, he said, and I, sitting beside him, added softly, to those who love us not because they have to, but because they want to. Eyes met mine. Some smiled, others nodded. I looked across the table, to Frank, who had stood beside me when I felt most alone, to Martin, who was learning how to show up, one step at a time, to Ethan, who had loved me through every jagged edge. And for the first time, I didn't feel like someone looking for a seat at the table. I felt like someone who had built it,